Hello and welcome. I'm Kate.
And I'm Emily, and this is Beyond the Neurotype,
A podcast that explores what it's like to be human affirming, regardless of labels, considerate of every person's individual needs, and allowing us to, ideally, understand what is behind every individual's actions, choices, and needs.
We do this with curiosity and love as we explore these individual and unique experiences that are rich with challenges, growth, and grace.
I'm Kate, a mental health social worker and synergetic play therapist. I'm the co-founder of the Village Therapy Hub. I'm a mum to 2 adolescents, and I love understanding and exploring what is happening beneath the surface for children and adults, and what behaviours are communicating to us. But let me keep it real. Much like yours, my life is a roller coaster. So I also understand the complexities of being a carer, the challenges of the day-to-day, and I won't pretend it's all enjoyable.
I'm Emily, a neurodivergent mum to a beautiful autistic girl and wife to a wonderful autistic man. I'm passionate about celebrating neurodiversity and creating a community where people are seen, held, and loved for who they truly are. It is my hope that as you listen to the stories of our beautiful guests, you feel inspired, validated, and supported in your journey.
This podcast is recorded on the land of the Dja Dja Wurrung people. We offer our heartfelt gratitude to the traditional custodians and elders, past, present, and emerging, for continued opportunities to learn, reflect, and grow. Hello, Emily.
Hey, Kate.
It's great to be back and to have another fantastic guest to reflect upon.
It was a real jam-packed episode. There was so much in that with Helen.
Wasn't there? We covered a lot of ground. I really enjoyed listening back to it, though. There were so many bits that it was really nice to go back and think about again. I think I particularly spent a lot of time reflecting on the impact the intergenerational impact of doing your own work.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we think that if we're doing the work and then it's about us. And that's why sometimes I think I get resentful about, like, why do I always have to be the one doing the stuff? And I've had enough now. And I talked about this when we were talking to Helen. But there's definitely times when I feel like, goodness me, I'm tired of doing all the work. And I think that's when I start to think, I get tired when I start to think that that's because I'm the only one that's impacted by it. And so I wish everyone around me would do more or be more engaged in the work. But what I've realized, and when we say work, we mean therapy, self-reflection, things that connect us more with our body, things that help us to consider what our behavior is communicating, because I think we forget that as adults, our behavior is communication as well. But as adults, we have an expectation of kind of noticing that for ourselves rather than anyone lovingly wrapping us up with that. So I think what I've realized over many years is that the ripple effect is very real, that it might be me that's going and investing the time and energy, but the ripple effect that it has on the rest of my family and my loved ones is actually quite significant.
Yeah, I feel that too. And it's really interesting timing that this episode has come up for me and my life. We obviously recorded this with Helen a few months ago. And the last week or so, a lot of these kind of generational traumas and patterns have really reared their ugly head again, and it's been quite tricky. And so I suppose it's really affirmed the importance of doing the work for yourself, but also for your children. But that kind of reparenting yourself almost is like, and looking at your parents and through their eyes of kind of what the trauma that they experienced and why they were the way that they were, but still that's painful for you. And, you know, and then the impact that has on the relationships around you and what you take in with your own children. And listening to Helen talk about how her daughter's anger was really triggering for her, and because there was a lot of anger in her home, and her way to cope safely with that is to try and diffuse and suppress her own anger, because her own anger was not safe. And that was very reflective of my childhood. That was, had a lot of anger in my home. And I think too, I was thinking about it, last reflection we did, we were talking a lot about like the fight or flight responses, and how like I actually did have a fight response. Like I think mine is like freeze or fawn, but actually I did have a fight response, but that became no longer safe. And so then you kind of flip into a different one in order to protect yourself. And it's just having a child that expresses a lot of anger can be really triggering for those reasons. But then it's actually just been the greatest blessing to then learn why that triggers something in me. And it's actually probably the unfairness that I've never been able to express anger. And so now I am trying really hard to healthily express my anger and express my feelings more. And having a child that, with a diagnosis or whatever that is the issue, actually just reflects sometimes back your own issue, and it's not actually a child issue.
Yeah. Children are incredible mirrors, and they do this fantastic job of shining back to us all the parts of us that feel wonky and unresolved. And actually, they'll do that to any adult they come into contact with, which is, I think, really interesting as well. That, our children won't necessarily come just for us. They'll also come as an opportunity for their grandparents or their teachers or your friends. Anyone that's going to come into contact with them is going to have the part shone back that they find the most confronting. And also the bits that they find the most lovable about themselves too. Kids are doing all of it. And we're all doing all of it, actually. It's not just reserved for children either.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're not taught this stuff either. So
which is why we take it so personally, why we then judge ourselves and think, oh my gosh, or judge ourselves or judge others. So when we're parenting, we tend to judge ourselves when we come across this. We tend to say, I'm failing as a parent. I keep reacting in that way to my child and I don't understand it and da 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 da, and they keep doing this thing, and how did I create a child that acts like this? We do that as a parent. And then just as an human, we put it onto the other people. How dare they be so much like that? How dare they react in that way? And it's usually because they're the parts of us that we struggle to present and to actually connect with, that we find their behaviours so triggering for us.
It was nice to hear someone, say that as well, like that they've had that experience. Because that's probably been, my biggest learning as a parent has been taking that mirror and, that initial like, oh my God reaction of like, how can they do this? And then but maintaining your own values of what you said when you set out to be a parent. I'm not going to do X, Y, Z. And when, these behaviours are kind of getting mirrored back at you that are triggering or what have you. And, mine was always a hard line on anything physical. And, Yeah, but you know that if you had behaved at a quarter of that way, that you would have been kind of knocked into the middle of next week. And yeah.
Yeah. And I think I want to just mention here that we also do this if we're someone that's had multiple adult romantic relationships. There's this really interesting thing that happens. And so I'll speak to those people just for a moment, where we attract people into our lives who are there to help us unravel the next layer to the pieces that we need to work on. And it's really interesting when I look back on my relationships, the way that I can see that I have traveled through some of my biggest challenges and pieces that I find the most difficult to manage in myself, how they've been brought to me in relationships.
Mm.
And so for those people that have stayed in a relationship for a long period of time, like you have, I don't know so much because I haven't experienced that myself about how that journey travels. But I'm sure that there are moments in those relationships where suddenly it feels like there's a whole lot of tension and a whole lot of challenge. And then you come through that in a way that has provided growth. And that is how that looks like in a long-term relationship someone like me who has various relationships. I think that happens in the relationships when I'm in them. But then there's a place of this person has given me all that they can give me, and now the tension is too big and we actually rupture. And then a next one will come along when I'm ready for the next piece of learning.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think, you know, Mike and I have been together for 20 years, and there's elements of we kind of like do this more so. And yeah, or one will kind of go through a period of growth. And but our dynamics changed a lot. Ours, you know, I didn't have any healthy conflict resolution skills when we got together, and we got together when I was a teenager. So, you know, we've learnt that. And Mike's a very calm person, and I am less so. And so I've kind of learnt a lot from him and other people that have maybe modeled something different that I've been around, and other relationships that you kind of see. And we've had a small amount of therapy, not a huge amount of therapy, but we've just kind of, I suppose, learnt over the years that it's better if we communicate respectfully and healthily, and not generally I would just not talk to him for a week or something, which isn't great. So
But we all have our strategies. And the fact that you're in a relationship with someone who can accept all those parts of you and go along that journey with you, I think is really valuable.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, he certainly wasn't perfect either. There was, but yeah, I think we both just can't be bothered with any crap now. That
Yeah.
it's just like, yeah, we just say it kind of how it is a lot of the time, and trying and just that unconditional positive regard, I suppose, that we talk about a lot. It's like, yeah, seeing each other for where we're at, not that it's this. I don't ever believe he has a bad intention towards me now. I used to. I used to think everything he did was because he secretly hated me and just wanted to make me miserable or whatever. Like, you know,
Yeah.
anytime you're fighting, it's because, you know, or he was wrong, or I suppose changing that mindset into that unconditional positive regard is that Mike's a good human. We're different. He sees things differently. This really upset me. He needs to know it really upset me, but yeah, it doesn't go that personal, like knife level.
You can now see there's no malicious intent
Yeah,
behind not unpacking the dishwasher.
yeah, yeah. Which is generally me not unpacking the dishwasher.
Okay,
To be
wrong
honest,
example.
yeah.
Well, he now knows there's no malicious intent behind. But it's
Behind,
that thing, isn't it? Because we do that in relationships as adults. We bring along all the baggage, but it shows up really differently because we're not children anymore. So we can't express it in the same way. But our behaviors still show the exact same struggles. And remembering that is so important. It's what keeps us in in adult relationships, whether they're romantic or friendships or co-workers or anything else.
Yeah. I think that unconditional positive regard really is key to relationships, because I know that, yeah, if you ever said something that was a bit off or whatever, that I wouldn't view you differently as a person. I know that you as a person. And just using that as an example, it hasn't actually happened. Um, but, I know your heart, I know your intentions, I know you're a good person. And so letting, you know, I don't know, sometimes we can just be so quick to jump in and create a story behind why someone's done something, and that story be so off as to what actually was the intent behind it. And um, yeah, the people that are in my life now, I guess I try and have that unconditional positive regard. And if I don't feel like I have that for them anymore, then they'll kind of not be in my life anymore. And the people that have me in their life, I hope that they would have that for me too, and see my heart and my intent, and know that I'm not willingly going out to harm them. And if that's not how they feel about me, I don't want to be in their life.
Yeah, I totally hear that, because we don't have a lot of time to waste on relationships that we don't hold high regard for, do we? We need to, at some point, realize that not everyone stays forever, and some friendships and situations only last for so long, and letting them go is actually the hugest benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's tough when it's family, because especially when there's these really tricky dynamics as well. It's kind of yeah, it's a big thing to kind of um you wouldn't necessarily say that all of your family hold you with unconditional positive regard.
Mm.
Yeah. And so
Would
it's
you
like,
say that it's harder with family because there's like this societal expectation that we stick by family, that family are who we're
yeah,
meant to just stay in relationship with for the whole of our life, regardless of how we actually feel about each other?
yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's tricky, like, it's layered, and there's often, kids involved, and, you know, um yeah,
And grief. There's grief involved because our family are, we like to believe, the people we're born into, because we're supposed to be the most connected. And there's this expectation that we'll love each other through anything. But that can sometimes lead to, we can treat each other anyway and expect that they will just put up with it because we're family. So sometimes it brings about excuses and unfair behaviors. And as we grow and evolve and do our own work, we get clearer on what we need and what benefits us. And we realize that the only person we control is ourselves. So we're going to look after ourselves, because we can't actually change anybody else around us. When I talked earlier about the impact of doing the work, we're still focused on us. We don't go into that with the intention of changing the behaviors of somebody else. We go into it with finding what we need to look after ourselves and connect back to us. And if that has a ripple effect, and when it does, then great. But sometimes it doesn't, because those people are stuck in their own woundings and trauma and carrying that in their own way, and they just don't know how to evolve and shift through that.
yeah. Yeah, and it's just yeah, not something I want for my child. And so
Yeah.
it just sorry, deepens the resolve, I suppose, to do the work.
Yeah. And you're right. When we have children in the mix, we make decisions based on what we're willing to have them exposed to, but also what we're wanting to model around what we're willing to expose ourselves to.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
definitely.
and an imbalance of power in a relationship can show up anywhere. And it's really important that we can show our kids that behaviors are not acceptable just because they're done by people that are labeled to love us.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
a really complex thing. You know, sometimes we have a parent that cannot manage their own wounds and they show up in all kinds of ways that impact those around them, and children being told that they should love that parent regardless really sets a tone of what you should accept from people in your life and what you're worth.
Yeah, and the kind of relationships that they'll enter into
Yeah.
as they get older as well. And, you know, if love and pain are kind of co-linked, you know, that's yeah. So it's tricky stuff. And sorry for getting a bit emotional. It's obviously a bit tricky this week.
I think
Yeah.
it's beautiful that you got emotional, Emily, because really valid that you feel what you feel, and it's really valid to follow the flow of that. You know, I think we were talking and things suddenly became really big and you were overcome and you followed that. It would be really easy to just kind of like pull it back and switch it off and try to like shut down. But following that and giving yourself the grace to just have that moment of experience before coming back around again is actually beautiful.
Mm.
And also, tears are an incredibly great treatment for the skin. So you just got a really free and really beautiful facial. And so I'm a bit jealous.
Did you notice that I didn't wipe them away? I just let them sit there.
Yeah, let them sink in. You got to
I
let them
took your
sit.
advice.
I told someone that this week their partner was crying. And so they started rubbing. I was talking to a couple and one of the couple started crying. So the other one started rubbing their face on their other's face. And then we were talking about how your forehead really misses out. So then they were grabbing the tears and putting them on their forehead. And I thought that was beautiful, because what a beautiful moment to acknowledge that these tears are actually powerful in so many ways. They cleanse our soul, but they also help our skin, and they're really beneficial to us. They're necessary. If we never cried, imagine what we'd miss out on in terms of cleansing.
I think it really, highlight, I don't know. I just think everyone should be in therapy. It really highlights the need for when we're looking at, all these interventions for our kids and stuff. It really should be kind of about working with the families as well.
Yeah.
One
And this
can't.
is the trouble with systems like, say, NDIS, where the children are funded and they're funded for all these therapies, and there's this expectation that they're going to go and they're going to go to the therapies, and there's no funding provided for families, no funding provided for parents. And it's one of my biggest bugbears about NDIS, and I have many, and I have had it for a long time, that this expectation that these children who have these complexities and these challenges that warrant this funding are expected to go and be responsible solely for changing everything in their family dynamic and in, like, how does that work? The parents have their own stuff. Of course they do. They're humans. The other siblings have their own stuff. That they're part of a system. There's complexity to this. We are never a silo alone. We are always within a system. So the idea that you would fund one single piece of that system and give no funding to the rest of it and expect anything to change, expect any goals to be reached, feels stupid to me. I don't understand the belief behind that.
Yeah, a lot of the NDIS stuff at the moment is very short-sighted and stupid, but this
Yes.
week,
As I said, many issues, but that one specifically for me. And so
yeah,
I think that is part of this conversation is that we are all part of systems. So when it involves our children, and I talked about this in the podcast with Helen, that my daughter had become really, really unwell and really terrifyingly and life-threateningly unwell. I think I just made up words there. And she didn't want to engage in anything. And everyone was like, you've got to get her into therapy. Like, she has to go to therapy. You have to get into therapy. She needs an OT. She needs this. She needs that. Like, all of these suggestions and NDIS funding for things that she should go and engage in. And she wasn't ready. She wasn't ready to engage in it. And in fact, trying to engage her was doing more harm than good, because it was causing her to feel under more threat and be further impacted. And
I
so
think it highlights to them that they're broken too. Like, I know my daughter feels that way. Like, yeah, she's like, why do I have 3 therapists? Like, that was on her list of bad things that happened to her that year, was I have 3 therapists. And, because it tells a story to her. I am so broken that I have 3 therapists.
yeah, absolutely. And so when I started to feel really lost and really unsure of how to help, and like nothing that anyone was telling me that I needed to do that make her do was possible, I realized that she came through me, that she's a part of me, and that surely I can impact her experience by working on myself and how I am handling and managing and sitting in and being triggered by her experience. And it was incredibly powerful because it took all the responsibility off her. And it didn't put all the responsibility on me. It just gave me an opportunity to actually feel like I could do something. Initially, that's what it was. It was like, oh, I found a way to actually feel like I'm doing something here. But very quickly, it became apparent that there were so many wounds in her that were wounds in me. And giving them permission to exist in me and to have airtime gave them permission for her too. And it was an incredible part of creating change in our entire system.
Yeah. And your experience there, when we haven't been through the same struggle as you, obviously, but when we've been through some big struggles of periods of very poor mental health, and it's again, that connection which you talk about, but I suppose that's where the ripple effect is on the parent doing the work, and my daughter, like yours, is very resistant to engaging with these services and doesn't want all these people around telling her, trying to assess her, or she's very wary of that, which is fair. Like, if I think about that, I probably would be too. All these people involved trying to fix me. But the value has been when I've worked with them, that's where the values come in, and Mike, and so I agree that we've got kind of a bit of a short-sighted view of things. It's actually, we probably need to change the systems around these kids in order for the child to then be able to survive and thrive in the system. They're the maybe alarm bell and not the fire.
Not the fire. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a very nice way to think about that. Yeah. Yeah, we act as if they're the fire and we run around shooting water all over them.
Yeah, trying to
and they're like changing, and we're like, what is happening? We're using all of our water.
Yeah, on the smoke alarm.
Yeah.
And that same, I suppose, aspect then when you look at schools, which we talk about so much, like again, it's a system issue rather than a child issue.
I think I also want to name, because this is a real part of my experience and probably not an easy thing for me to say, but I've got 2 children, a son and a daughter, both with their own challenges and complexities and have both struggled in lots of ways. My daughter, I think I have more, she's more like me. So therefore, when her struggles became really, really big, I could see really strongly how they connected to me and my experiences, and how they were shadows of my own challenges. And so that really helped me to be able to step into doing some of my own therapy around that. My son is not so much like me. He's like me in some ways. I like to think that the best bits of him are like me. He also has a lot of his dad and a lot of characteristics that come from his dad. And I have a lot of trauma from his dad. And so sometimes when he struggles, what he actually brings up for me is my own trauma. And that can cause me to respond in a way that is not as helpful. And I probably haven't been able to lean as much into doing my own therapy to be able to help him with resolving that, because before that, there's a whole piece of me needing to do work around the trauma recovery to then be able to go to the next layer, which has made that feel more complex and harder, and probably has taken longer. And at times I've been really resistant to it, because I'm like, this is not even my fault. Like, this is like the fault. You know, sometimes we want to find blame just to feel better. And so that trips us up constantly, this piece that revolves around me being triggered and then him needing me to support him, but there being this tension piece. So I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes we have these really complex relationships with our own children, that it's not always as straightforward as there's challenges, and so we'll go and do some work and that will help. Sometimes there's many, many layers to the complexity, and we're not just dealing with our own family system. Like, I feel like with my daughter, I'm working strongly within my family system. And with my son, the same work would be strongly in his biological father's family system. And that's not really a place I want to go. You know, like, a lot of me resists stepping over there and working in that system. So, you know, I think also I wanted to say that because I want to give voice to the parents who feel like they can't relate at all to what their kids are going through, or what their kids are going through is bringing up so much in them that they actually really struggle to be around it, and name that that is totally okay as well. And noticing that is actually so, so important. And if all you can do for right now is notice that, that's okay. Like, that's massive.
Yeah, and I've heard other parents talk about that when there's been a particularly difficult breakup, and one child is so much like the parent that's just the other parent that's just caused them so much trauma or pain, or, you know, and there's this real hatred almost sometimes, you know, towards the other parent. But then this child that you love is reflecting a lot of, you know, like this person. And yeah, that's really tricky. Really
So there's
tricky.
complexities, aren't there?
Mm.
You know, and I think that brings you back to the family piece around if we're challenged by our siblings or our parents. You know, there are more pieces than just them involved in that system. So, yeah, this is really complex stuff, and may be so far from where some people are at in terms of their capacity to start doing anything in this space. But this is a real invitation to just start noticing those pieces, because we do nothing before we've noticed it. And it's amazing how noticing can help with adjusting.
Mm.
Yeah. And I really do encourage people, if anyone has any interest after listening to Helen, to access the family constellation world, because as woo-woo as it sounds, and as confronting as it can be to be in it, it's an absolute shapeshifter.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like this kind of combination of woo-woo and therapy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the woo-woo. And it's interesting we use the word woo-woo, because like woo-woo is actually where everything started. Like therapy started in the world of woo-woo. It became about energies and natural medicines, and this is how it all started. So actually what we do now is the woo-woo, really. That is the stuff that's how it all began. It's the stuff that's embedded in our primal needs, in our human biology, in like we made it woo woo by giving it all these labels and talking about it in all these ways like we do now. So actually it's really interesting that we use woo woo as if it's a bad thing, but actually it's the roots. It's where all the goodness is. But so the reason we use that term is because it does use the energetic space, and it uses the space of trusting that there is more in us than just us, and bringing together the fibers of our ancestors, and realizing that we are all the product of everyone that came before us in our ancestry, and this very real and scientific evidence that if someone back in our history suffered in some way, it gets carried through the genes. And there's been for a long time a belief that that's just something we live with. Like, oh, I'm traumatized because of something that happened to my ancestors. And what family constellations has gone on to prove is that actually I can heal that, and then it doesn't exist anymore in my family lineage going forward. And what I've found really interesting is that I can heal that, and it will actually have an impact on my live children. So it's not too late for me because I've already birthed all of the children I'm going to birth. I do believe that if I had another child now, they would be significantly different to my other two, in that I have done so much work and have done so much healing, but you can also change it for the live ones. And that means that their children will be less impacted.
And that's, in the way that that nurture argument, in the way that you parent them, but also because the hormones, and we've talked about epigenetics a few times on this podcast, and it just keeps popping up, which is interesting. But the influence of the hormones on the fetus as well, and can have an impact on what life's going to be like for them. So
yeah, and you probably know this better than me, but our eggs exist within us from like multiple generations back, don't they? Because we're born with all of our eggs, women. So we existed in multiple generations.
Yeah, so
because we're in their eggs.
The egg that created my daughter was actually made inside my mother.
Yes.
Which is crazy.
Incredible. And so that goes to show that, like, of course, in 3 generations, there's going to be a carrying. So, of course, if we go back and think about the fact that all of that going forward, like, that's pretty mind-blowing. But it makes so much sense when you think about it. It's so obviously true when you think about it like that, because, my great, 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 great grandmother experienced something. And then every person that's come through, the eggs have been created within the system of the struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's really interesting. And like they've seen that in, the effects of war and and things on, which is kind of, I suppose, how they identified epigenetics and the impacts of poverty on children generations after the poverty's been resolved. And
yeah, absolutely. And we think easily of it in instances where there's a big example like war, poverty, or a significant natural disaster, but it happens in really small ways too, in our own experience of trauma, in a experience of violence, or in the loss of a child, in loss, in grief, in miscarriages, in all of those things. Any hardship registers as a trauma and then comes with us.
Yeah, I'm quite curious about it. The family constellations. I'm still getting my head around it. I actually wish I'd watched the Netflix doco that you talked about before this, but at the time we recorded it, we were kind of in the thick of heaps of interviews, and I had a big long list of all these things that I needed to read about and watch and listen to, and it's kind of slipped by me. But re-listening to it again this morning, it's like, I wish I'd watched that Netflix piece on it before we recorded today.
Well, you still can. And what's beautiful is that Helen, through her business, the Family Systems Hub, is doing more and more constellation work. Then since we talked to her, it's been really growing. In fact, Debbie, one of the main facilitators of the family constellations work through Helen, who was located in Argentina, has now moved to Australia. So there's actually been some in-person family constellation work happening in Australia, in Melbourne and Sydney as well, which is incredible. Melbourne and Brisbane actually is where the next one is. And so it's becoming more and more available. So I encourage people, if you're at all curious, have a look. And because, let me say this, if you were to attend a family constellation session, whether that's online or in person, and I have not yet attended an in-person one, but I really hope to. But I've attended a few online. You do not have to participate. You can go and use it as an exercise to just see what happens. You can opt out of being available to be chosen as what they call a representative. You can not put your hand up to have a constellation done on you. You can totally sit in the background. And I did that for a couple, I think, before I actually ever put my hand up for one, just to see what it's like. Because actually, because of what it is, the ripple effect of every person that attends that constellation is significant. So you may not constellate, you may feel like you did not participate, you may say nothing, do nothing for that entire session, and you will walk away with shifts in your system that will impact your world. It's a very deep experience.
Well, I'll have to try it. That makes me feel better to try it, that I don't have to do anything.
No, you can totally do nothing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I did that for a long time because I wanted to get my real sense of safety before. And then I dived in and had a go for myself, and now you can hardly hold me back. Now, if I'm in one and they look for a volunteer on the spot, I'm quite frequently like, yes, I've always got something to work on.
Oh, yeah. Well, they got a bit there with me that they could do, so.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to think that we can shift, that we don't have to stay where we are, that we can change things for ourselves and for others, and that it all benefits us. At the end of the day, we want to try and make our life as fulfilling and as connected as possible. And sometimes we are stuck with experiences that were not directly ours and they impact us. And the opportunity to be free of that is too great. Yeah.
I think that's probably a lovely thought to go with this week, and we'll catch you next week with another wonderful guest conversation, which we can't wait to share with you.
Perfect. See you then.
See ya.
For more information on today's conversation and guest, head to the links provided in the description. Please like and subscribe to keep up to date with more content, and it helps us out with the algorithm too. Beyond the Neurotype is not a licensed medical or mental health service, and any information or advice given is general in nature. Please seek professional help if anything mentioned in today's episode has raised questions or